I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. To kick us off today, we have Peter Frosch. He's a Senior VP of Strategic Partnerships at the GREATER MSP, the Minneapolis-Saint Paul Regional Economic Development Partnership. Peter's session this morning is titled, "Is Your Community a Magnet for Talent?" In his role at the GREATER MSP, he is responsible for developing and implementing economic development strategies for the region, and we know that attracting and retaining talent is a key component of that work. So thank you for being here today, Peter.
It's kind of a distance. Well, good morning. Great to see you. I hope the same amount of people showed up for breakfast as went to bed here last night. We're so excited to welcome you to our community. We do have summer, and you are experiencing it now. It's really kicking up. It's coming a little early this year. Looked at your itinerary, a lot of great speakers. You're learning a lot of really important things about the community, and we're just excited that you're interested in being here and learning from what we're doing. I'm going to talk about talent this morning. I was also asked to talk about this regional indicator dashboard, which some of you may have seen. We just released the new version. This is kind of, okay. I wasn't aware of the size of the group, so I only brought 30 copies. So I underestimated the interest. I've got a number of different slides. We're going to go through this relatively quickly, and then I want to make sure that we get time for questions and answer towards the end. You talked to Mike Langley last night, the CEO of GREATER MSP. He gave you some of the overview of what's this economy all about and, some of the general growth. It is based on these 5 sectors of strength. The secret sauce of the economy of Minneapolis-Saint Paul is that we have this really diverse industry base. And so when something is going down, something's always going up. Talent seems to cross sector. So when Target laid off 1,200 people a year and a half ago, which is a pretty unusual thing in this community, about 400 of those people walked down the street literally 2 blocks to a group called SPS Commerce, which was hiring as many people as they could get, but they didn't have any brand. And so the best hope they had was getting these folks from Target. So part of what we try to do in talent and at GREATER MSP is understand the nature of this economy, how does it work, and then what can we do to support some of those kind of natural drivers of growth. The regional strategy was created in 2013 and started implementation in 2014. This is the first time that the Minneapolis-Saint Paul region had ever had an economic development strategy. Minneapolis had a strategy, presumably. Hennepin County may have had one. But we had never come together to really aggregate forces, look at the shared data. And the reason is because things had been pretty good. GREATER MSP didn't exist until about 5.5 years ago, even though every major U.S. metro in the country had an economic development partnership, because again, things have been pretty good here. But civic leaders saw that our job growth was not keeping up with peers around the country, started looking into that, understood the other metros had built a partnership like this to do the things that GREATER MSP now does. We started the strategy work about 2 years after we created GREATER MSP, not because it was less important, but because we had to kind of win the right to convene and do that work. There are a lot of institutions and really credible leaders in this community, many of whom you're meeting, and you got to prove yourself a little bit around here that you can be a leader. The 3 pillars of the strategy are telling our story more effectively, because if more businesses and people around the country and the world knew what was here based on the facts, more people would be coming here. This is a little bit of a best-kept secret, as Michael probably talked about. That doesn't do us any favors, and we need more people, and of course we're looking for more business all the time. Prioritizing talent, human capital is our #1 competitive advantage here. It's not tax rates, and it's not typically perception of the weather, and so it's all about the people. And the people have made this place really incredible, and that's our best bet going forward, and we need to double down on that. So it's about prioritizing talent, and it's about building on our global sectors of strength. Some places it's banking. If you're in Charlotte, you're talking about banking. If you're in the Valley, you're talking about tech. Here you got to talk about a lot of different things. There are a lot of different sectors, and so we have to have a strategy that builds on all of those. One of the first things we did when we launched this strategy back in early 2014, and it was real lean. because we weren't doing this in the midst of a crisis. We were coming out of the recession faster and stronger than other metros in the country. People were feeling pretty excited. There were cranes in the sky. And so it was more of an opportunity exercise rather than a crisis response. So what that meant is there weren't millions of dollars that were put on the table, and there weren't a lot of conversations about governance. It was, let's figure this out. Let's use this data and look at these pillars. There's not going to be any report, because reports don't seem to change things that much. Let's just get to action as fast as we can and try to do it in a new, clever way. And so one of the first things we launched is we built this regional dashboard. And the issue here is that we need a shared set of objective measures to track how we're doing in this metro, but also to define what competitiveness is. If you were to ask back in 2014 a CEO, how are we doing here? They'd say, cranes in the sky, absorption of labor force, this place is really clicking. We're doing great. The stats would have suggested we were one of the strongest economies in the country. If you ask a public sector official, or maybe the head of a philanthropy, well, the public sector probably would have been talking about the hangover from the Great Recession, the foreclosures that they see, and the challenges in communities. And philanthropic leaders might have been talking about some of the racial disparities that we have in this community, which are some of the worst in the country. And so, maybe we're the worst, maybe we're the best. That's no basis of governing a region. And so we said we need to create a shared view that brings all of these ideas together. And the idea is not to have just better data. This isn't just a data project. It was designed to be a regional change initiative that starts with data instead of politics. And that was the big idea. We didn't talk a lot about that at the time because that sounds a little bit like, what is this going to be about? We just said, we need this dashboard, right? And that got everybody going. And so to that point about the data, we started with a credible team of experts that are not, we did not get people who were involved in the political process together and kind of go around and say, well, what's the lowest common denominator idea that everybody can agree to? We started with the data folks and said, what are the things that are most important to this community to know and track that are the basis of our competitiveness? Let's find compelling and credible ways to measure those things and then see how we're doing, whatever that story happens to be. It took us about 14 months to put this together, not because it takes 14 months to build a dashboard. You could probably do that in a weekend, but to build something that's embraced by the community, that actually takes at least 14 months. We looked at national and international benchmarks for this work, and we went to leaders to develop what are the categories that we're going to track. This is a customized look at what's important to this place. And that's what was very compelling as an idea to leaders here. And these are the categories that they came up with. One of the discussions was, should equity be its own category? And there was a thorough discussion about that, and there was strong agreement, no, we need to distribute measures of equity and inclusion throughout this dashboard so it's not set apart. And then, well, how do you pick the metrics? We were looking at thousands of different options. And so we created a set of filters that we ran these thousands of metrics through. We wanted to measure things that were outcomes and not inputs. We wanted to measure things that were understandable. This was designed to be a leadership tool that could be presented in 20 minutes, to leaders in this community, regardless of their sector. If it gets hyper-technical, you lost it, right? So it's got to be clear. It needs to be current and accessible. You can build a dashboard that costs $25,000 or $100,000 to do every year because the data is really hard to get. So that was one of the considerations. We were going to be tracking actual numbers, not just relative rankings. Forbes and others are putting out, they're selling magazines every year and the rankings have to change so people buy magazines. We want to say, what are the actual numbers? It was really hard, but we really worked to get metro numbers. You can get county, you can get city, you can get state for almost anything, but to get a metro or an MSA is pretty tricky, and that's where things get expensive, but that was one of the filters. We want to be predictive, so you can get really good data when you look backwards. The further back you go, the cleaner that data gets, but it's not that helpful if you're looking at something that's 4 or 5 years old. And then you have to have the potential to influence it. So if it's really interesting and it's important, but you can't do anything about it, we should measure it, but maybe it shouldn't be on this dashboard. We track peer regions, so it's objective, but we also benchmarked against other peers across the country. This is based on some geographic diversity, and it's also kind of economic trajectory. Seattle, Boston, Atlanta, San Francisco, these are some of the most globally connected metros in this country. You don't see LA or New York. We felt they're a little big. Chicago's much larger than this metro, but we compete quite a bit with Chicago for business and people, so we wanted to have them on the board. This is a challenge set. This is not the group of metros you pick if you want to create a marketing document, but that's not what we were after. And then through the course of this process, we learned some really interesting things, that we created this thing called Vital Stats on the back of the dashboard because in the beginning, we were thinking, well, these would be a lot of the measures that we'd have in the dashboard. These are kind of traditional measures of economic performance. But then as we got into this work, we said, gross regional product is pretty hard to manage too. That's an outcome of a lot of inputs. And if we're watching these really big, these are like the biggest gears of the economy, and they churn slow, and they're really hard to get leverage over. So let's create a dashboard that moves upstream, tracks the indicators that spin a little bit faster so you can see change more easily, but you can also, if you affect change in these measures, you're going to have leverage over some of those bigger results. We created these end caps, talent pipeline, job access, shared prosperity, in part because we were realizing in some cases having one measure was less informative than having none at all. If we were only tracking in terms of the talent pipeline, percent of students graduating from high school overall, it's going to be masking racial disparities that are really important to see. But if we only show the gap because of our current mix of race and ethnicity, you're not really seeing the actual number. And so we had to put some of these kind of competing facts against one another. That project team of data folks that built the dashboard was then augmented in the second year with something we built called the Regional Competitiveness Working Group. What really sets this project apart is the fact that you've got leaders from the Minnesota Chamber, from the Regional Council of Mayors, the Metropolitan Council, kind of everybody who's got some regional governance stake in the game are coming to the table in a kind of a pre-political space to look at the data and say what is really happening. A lot of these folks did not have this kind of relationship before. People would assume, well, these people must talk all the time. No. They argue at the state capitol and often find themselves on opposite sides of various political issues. So this was a little bit of this is how we're driving change. We're trying to restructure some of these relationships. And this isn't easy, and it's not natural, and it's certainly not fast. But we feel like this is, a really fundamental part of what this project has to be about. And so their job is to put the dashboard to work in their organizations, to collectively, work together to analyze what the data is saying. So they're kind of like the deciders, as it were, every year as we kind of make decisions about the dashboard, to kind of be ambassadors to communicate this, and then to figure out how do we bring this data into action in this community. The early impact was a little bit quicker and more at scale than we even had anticipated. We knew that there was going to be some value, but we weren't sure what all the value was going to be. Very quickly, once the dashboard came out, different organizations, partnerships, and companies started using this. When I presented this at the Greater MSP board meeting, several months after launch, a couple of our board members stood up who were the heads of large regional companies in Minneapolis-Saint Paul that had other locations in the U.S. that they tend to compete internally for jobs and capital investment. And they said that they've been using the dashboard to argue for putting more people in investment in this metro versus other places around the country or the world, which was a much more direct connection to jobs and capital investment than we had anticipated, but we wrote that one down. So then also, a little bit surprisingly, we're now up to 16 U.S. regions who have kind of called or visited specifically about this project. So we learned that this is an issue, not only getting the right data, but how do you bring people together around data and then use that to actually drive results. I mean, that's a conversation that many communities are having, and we've been doing some sharing out. Very quick top-level results. So the results for 2017 just came out. This is the quickest analysis we've got. About over 50%. We're great and getting greater. We've got about 35% in the middle, and then we've got some red light issues at the bottom that we're tracking. The easiest analysis that was benchmarking us against our peers was you take the rank across each category and average it and do the same for all the others. And we've been consistently number 4 in this peer set across the 3 years that we've done this, which is kind of the right Minnesota approach. So we're pretty good, but we could be better. So people they find that like a really comfortable message to receive. But it told us a lot about what this dashboard's all about when you see who's on top. And we didn't know, I didn't realize how much my job was at stake until the data first came together, and I said, we could have been 11. But we weren't. And this has stabilized over time, and you can kind of see how these peer groups are moving, but there's kind of a top, middle, and a bottom that's shaking out. And it's giving this region confidence to tell our story more accurately, and to know that it's not just marketing. I mean, these are facts. That compared to some of these other places that we hear a lot about, we're doing well. It's also produced some really big questions. So we're now using this analysis to focus and kind of drive the conversations that aren't naturally happening, but they're the things that matter most. So, where is the global economy creating opportunity and headwinds in our economy? Why is our region so successful at creating women, or involving women and immigrants in our workforce, but not racial minorities? We're #1 in gender participation in the workforce, in female participation in the workforce, and immigrant participation, and towards the bottom in racial participation, in minority participation, which is a tough reality to look at. It's also not intuitive, and we're really digging into this now to understand what are the mechanics of this labor force and this community that are driving some of those things. One of my big lessons out of this is, when you're #1 or 2 in this really tough peer set, it tends to be culture that got you there, because there's no one project or initiative that makes you that strong. And if you're towards the bottom in any of these categories, there might be some culture there too. So that's been a tough thing, but it's helping us drive conversations around that. What's a family sustaining wage, and how do benefits factor into how we understand wages? So these are some of the big questions that we are now using, and we're going back to especially public sector institutions, to say these are the questions that we need to answer. This is the demand that's coming out of the actual economy. We agreed as a region, these are the things that matter most. These are the questions that are coming out of the data. So please answer these questions. Let's talk about how we're going to answer them. So that's the dashboard project. At the end, happy to talk about that. Another initiative that we created and launched last year is called Make It MSP. So this is the Regional Talent Retention and Attraction Initiative. You heard this from Mike yesterday, that it's about accelerating job growth and capital investment, and GREATER MSP launched in late 2011 to do this. When GREATER MSP launched, there wasn't a lot of talk about human capital. We were in the midst of a recession. There's plenty of human capital. That wasn't the issue. It was about jobs, jobs, jobs. And very quickly in this community, it became about workers, workers, workers. And I mean, that's the way it is now, certainly across most states in the country. And we're really feeling that quite acutely. Their question?
Between jobs and workers, describe the nuance.
Available positions, people to fill them.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand. So the mission of accelerating job growth and capital investment, that hasn't changed. But what it takes to do that has changed a lot given the nature of the economy. So today we're finding that available workforce induces jobs. There's a lot of pent-up demand that is even hard for us to see. People are not posting positions. They're holding back on strategic investments that they will make with the knowledge or confidence that the available workers are there to do it. And so, I mean, that's what we're seeing. It's really hard to get a sense of that because it's all shadow opportunity. But that's what we're looking for. And so part of what the Retention Attraction Initiative has to be about is a little bit of a confidence game to get out there internally within the region and say, we're on this, we're working on it, we're going to do this as smart as any other place in the country, and you have the confidence to keep growing here. So we talked about prioritizing talent. What does that actually mean? Well, the challenge in this moment for this community is the convergence of some really big demographic trends in space and time. People always like to kind of call, there's a moment, but when it comes to human capital here, there is a moment. This is different than what we've seen here 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We have really low employment and high workforce participation. That's a pretty standard thing in this economy. We have traditionally one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, if not the lowest, and we have the highest workforce participation rate in the country. That's usually great, but what it means is that there's not a lot of slack labor out there. And so we have to get really creative and very effective at finding kind of hidden talent pools. We also are getting increasingly diverse, which is great. It's going to make us more innovative. It's going to add to the richness and the whole value proposition of this region. But because we have not succeeded in educating minority students and involving minorities in the workforce as we have everybody overall, that's a huge challenge for us, and it has to be and is a major priority. We also, at the state level, we're in the upper Midwest, and the upper Midwest or anywhere between, I don't know, Pennsylvania, over to the west. This has not been a major population growth area since the end of World War II. Minnesota has broken out of that a little bit, and it has grown faster in terms of population than many other states in the upper Midwest. But we don't see the kind of general flow that the West and South has seen. So we're looking at organic population growth in Minnesota approaching 0 for the first time in the history of the state. And then it kind of bounces back, and it's because of certain generational characteristics. But it's really hard for people to understand, well, it doesn't sound good, but how big of a deal is that going to be? It's going to be a really big deal, and it's hard to explain what living in that reality will look like until you're there, which is there are no extra people. And so that plus this falling organic growth plus this tradition of kind of moderate attraction, we have inflow. It's positive migration, and especially into this metro, we have positive migration of millennials, and so our young worker base is growing. But the dashboard, because we're tracking this, told us that this year we had about 2,000 net positive millennial migrants into this metro, where Seattle was like 14,000. And so you think about how different that trend is over the course of 5 years. It's really significant. So we're looking at potentially 114,000 worker shortage by 2020 in this metro. And that's a really big number. And we're out there saying, okay, this is different. We have to do some innovative things at scale, and we have to commit as a community to re-engineering the equation that we've used to put our workforce together. So think differently, right? The talent pipeline of early childhood K through 12, post-secondary worker training and retraining, that of course is the foundation. And we have traditionally in Minnesota been really good at this. And we invest in education. We're extremely highly educated, state and metro. But we have to keep our foot on the gas and do even more. But we also need to do an even better job at retaining people that we're producing coming out of this pipeline and turn on the magnet and bring a lot more people in. And this was an interesting kind of cultural conversation as I started talking about, because no one was talking about this, several years ago. And a lot of questions I got were, well, how many more people do we need from outside? We're good. We don't need others. And I was like, this is really, about math. This isn't, so there's a little bit of a headwind there, but over time, if we started to experience this, the private sector was there in 2013. They saw this coming, it was happening. And now we're seeing it kind of cross over to the public sector, nonprofit sector, and others. I mean, of course, this is not the only metro that's talking about this. Here's a very brief summation of other talent retention attraction initiatives, some of which are focused on boomerang, some of which are state level, some of which are regional. But we're aware that many of these places are spending multiple millions of dollars a year on retention attraction. And that is certainly not the opportunity, the kind of financial opportunity we had with this project. And so we had to come at this a different way. Because again, when we started this work back in 2014, we weren't deep in the midst of a crisis, and so we weren't feeling that, people weren't feeling that pinch. The way we did this was not to start with a marketing campaign. We said, because again, knowing the community, being authentic, this place doesn't naturally love marketing. That if telling our story wouldn't be one of our 3 pillars of our strategy. So we have to build from our strength. Let's do something we're good at, which is find a problem and come together and work on it, right? So we had Doug Baker, the CEO of Ecolab, Bert Koliani, the CEO of Polad Companies. The Polads owned the Twins and a number of other large companies. We also had foundation presidents and professors and university presidents and tech talent and entrepreneurs and recruiters and HR leaders. It was a weird mix of people that we got around the table looking at each other who didn't know each other and say, well, what is this going to be about? And we didn't know what this was going to be about. We said, we know that all of you have something to bring to this conversation, and somehow together we are going to design a solution for this community to retain and attract talent. And the assumptions that went into design is really important in the work that I do. We don't have the luxury of getting things wrong or wasting a lot of resources. We have to get it right pretty fast, and it's got to scale pretty fast. And so we think a lot about how to build things that are going to work. And so in this work, it meant we have to create something that sustains over a number of years. If we create something great that goes on for 24 months, it just doesn't matter. If we run a campaign with ads that are amazing ads for 24 months all across this country, it just doesn't matter, because we're talking about a structural challenge in our labor force. So we have to have a sustained structural answer to that. And that is really important, because then how do you get people's attention and buy-in, and how do you build a system, where no system exists for retention and attraction? We need to connect employers and community. The employers were there. By community, we're talking about young professionals, we're talking about arts, we're talking about all the things that you want to be connecting people to keep them here, and selling so people understand that they're here so they come. But those things were not connected. And we were finding by working with employers that they didn't know the best stories to tell. They didn't know the best ways to get their employees connected to this community or recruits. You have to have multiple interventions. There's no silver bullet here. That's always a common temptation. You get people around the table, let's come up with one great idea, and then all get behind that idea. And that's not a great idea. You have to have, we're not talking about one thing, we're talking about a really complex situation of the decision-making of tens of thousands of individuals over the course of many years, right? So you better have a few different ideas that you're going to bring to that, because they're not all going to work, and they're not going to work right away. We have to leverage existing resources. Let's not build something that's just this layer of excellence on top of a bunch of other things that maybe aren't working how they need to work. We've got to find something that actually gets into the systems where resources and capacity are, and then find a way to orient and drive that existing capacity and those resources in more innovative, more effective directions than they might be right now. That's obviously not easy. We need to innovate. We just assume that almost everything we're going to do has never been done. And so we got to have a way to innovate and fail quick and fast if it fails, and then and get to scale. And one of the ways we did that is find problems with markets. So find discrete problems that are experienced by certain customers, and then create products that deliver value that you can more or less sell. And so an example of that will be employers had some specific needs in terms of talking about this community, and we understood by working on focus grouping and surveying, like customer insight, going to those employers, what do you need? And then we built products to answer that need, and that created momentum, and it made this whole thing feel a lot different than other kind of community initiatives that they've experienced in the past. We ask the employers who participate in this to show up with their business brain. Don't bring your charity hat. We need you working and showing up with your problems, and we're going to take your problems and we're going to build solutions together. The goals of this whole effort are pretty ambitious. We're going to improve social inclusion. So that means making this a better place for all people to come and stay, regardless of race or ethnicity. It means making this a place where newcomers can more successfully break in. One of the great things about this place is we retain people, as well as any other place in the country. But the challenge is that people have their friends. And so sometimes since high school. And so when you move here and you're like, hey, you want to hang out? You want to hang out? I've lived in DC, and I've lived in New York, and I've lived in Chicago, and I've lived overseas. When you're in more transient places, it has kind of a transient culture. People are looking for that. And here people get in, they're like, how do I break in? And they'll spend years struggling to do that, and that's not okay. And interestingly, again, cultural, people who are smart people who have not had that experience just didn't get it, and they still don't really get that. Like, I don't understand. Just like go to the newspaper, Google it. And like, there's a serious problem that every transplant has. We need to find a way to address that. Connecting talent to community, talent to employers, and then closing near-term talent gaps. So social inclusion, that's a long play, right? There are things that we're going to start doing now to shift that dial, but in 90 days, we need more software engineers. So what are we going to do in the next 90 days with our employers to get more software engineers? So we've developed kind of multiple time horizon strategies. In the short term, we built a digital platform, MakeItMSP.org, that didn't exist, that brings all of these different stories about our region and assets and all that together. We built a recruiter toolkit as a part of this that puts stories and videos and news feeds and interviews, things that are free to any employer in this region to use to tell the stories about this place, to answer questions for potential recruits, and get their employees connected. And then we started, 2016, the first year of this work, we really went deep on this customer insight thing. And so we said, newcomers are important. So we interviewed over 800 newcomers, and we focus grouped them. And professionals of color are critical to the future of this economy. So we interviewed over 1,200 professionals of color. And so we created a base of insight that we've never had in this community and that employers could not get. You know, Target, Cargill, doesn't matter how big you are, you can't ask people some of the questions we ask them, right? And that's some of the value that they started seeing. They said, it's really helpful to know this. We never could have found this out. And so working together, we can be smarter than we ever could be apart. And people started to see that. And we just put a sliver of that into this insights report. I'm not big on reports, but we did find that, you know, we're getting all this insight. Let's do a little minimal viable product and see if this is useful. And it turned out to be useful. In the medium term, we built a system of welcoming called MSP Hello that is now scaling very fast because it's working with other institutions in the community. So 2 weeks ago at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, we had 1,000 people come to learn about summer in Minneapolis-Saint Paul. And they were walking up to the table and said, I moved here 2 weeks ago. Like, who do I talk to? And you know, we're just kind of bringing people out into the open and then getting them connected. Retaining professionals of color, we're putting together a regional strategy to improve the retention of professionals of color, which the data says we do not do as well as retaining professionals overall. And attracting technology talent, we're doing some, yes?
What is professionals of color?
Non-whites.
Professionals, okay.
And in the long term, there are some bigger things we're doing because, you know, 10 years from now, we want people to be just graduating from school moving here because they just have a sense and they know that there's opportunity. I mean, as of today, this morning, there are 50,000 posted jobs in this region on makeitmsp.org. So, you know, that's a compelling opportunity at scale for folks. But in the long term, we're working on building the startup ecosystem, and we just launched a major project on that last week. We're working on the higher education partnerships. We didn't start with higher education. Again, this was a design issue. We did a little bit of testing very early on. I found working with higher ed systems can be challenging. It takes longer to get a decision, et cetera. There's a lot of power there, and we're starting to access that now, but we didn't start there. And then we're doing some PR. We are doing some public relations work based on the relationships that we have, the deep relationships we have with things going on in this community. Like this weekend, there's this thing called Northern Spark, which you likely have not heard about. It's an all-night arts festival in Minneapolis. It's incredible. This year it's going to be on the Green Line, the train between Minneapolis and St. Paul, and it's going to be in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood with the Somali community and the Hmong community in Little Mekong. It's going to be down at the Union Depot in St. Paul. Last year we got 50,000 people. And the people that come out to this, you know, this is like the young demographic. And so it's like a secret. People don't even know this happens. And we're saying this is like our South by Southwest, just so that nobody knows about it. You know, this community created this, and art is our thing. Like, we do that here, and we love it. And so let's rally around this thing and just build it up. And so we were doing some PR nationally and internationally around that. So, you know, this year for Make It MSP, it's about bringing recruiters together. We created a talent tips e-newsletter. We found we were just producing so much stuff that they didn't know how to navigate it. So we put together something simple that they get every couple of weeks, and that's how we're starting to measure impact. You know, there'll be a new report this year that will have a lot more data because we found that was useful. And right now we're rehashing the website, and we're going to relaunch it and the recruiter toolkit in a few weeks. We've got an intern program we started this year. So this tells you a little bit something about this community. So our pilot for our intern welcoming event is going to be at US Bank Stadium in a week and a half, and it'll have 700 interns. Because we have a group of companies working together called the Enterprise Team. And so it's these companies and their talent leaders are sitting around the table, and they contribute to this effort. and they're investors in Greater MSP, and they're building and shaping this work together, and we're solving problems that they've never had the opportunity to collectively solve. It's just their interns. And so next year, it could be 2,000 or 3,000 interns. We're working on tech, doing a lot of kind of digital marketing around the country and using all the insights that we gathered from the previous year. And then this is a shot from MSP Hello, the welcoming ecosystem, and we're producing a new neighborhood guide, et cetera. So we're really excited about this, because this has been going on for a year and a half. And it's scaling like mad. And it's scaling because it's deeply connected and aligned to what's going on in the community. And we just designed this a different way. So we've got a team of teams concept that we're using to manage this, where there's a small core, and then we've got a set of captains who are leading teams, and those captains have teams in the community. And we feel like that's a system that can really grow. And we're using the how of that we're doing this, and we're bringing that into the indicators work and bringing that into a food and ag sector project. So the learning, the value of doing all this in the economic development partnership is the learning is circulated in real time. And so every single day, I'm learning something from some other thing that we're kind of cross-pollinating. So, we've got a little bit of time. Indicators, make an MSP. I was also asked to talk about the trade work, which I asked Mike to talk about because I didn't think we'd have time this morning. I saw a hand over here.
Have you done any studies that you've been able to look at how you can have multiple generations collaborate through that millennium? How they can work together?
So the generational question about how do you get multiple generations working on these problems is yes. So on the startup work, for instance, the startup community tends to be younger. Not uniformly, but it skews a little bit younger. And so we're building this effort around founders first, but if the CEOs and the mayors and the foundation presidents don't understand the value proposition of having a thriving startup community, we're only going to get so far, because the startup community only has limited resources to do things to build itself. And so a strategic element of that work that we just launched is creating the case for action around startups that we're going to take to boardrooms all around this community, on a month-by-month basis. So to build that, that's essentially a generational interplay. And we're saying, listen, you don't have to be a startup founder or even care about it, but if you care about growth, if you care about talent, if you care about the future of this community, we're going to prove to you through data that you have to care about startups. And then the startup community is going to create an innovators agenda by this fall, and they're going to raise up and kind of call that question to others in the region and say, here are the things that we need, and they're not things that we can do alone. And so we'll test that theory. So that's one example.
We've got an online questioning that we're doing, so I'm just going to take some questions that have been submitted. How are the dashboard and Make It MSP initiatives funded?
So the dashboard, took, a year and a half to do before it surfaced. We leveraged Greater MSP research, our research team in part, to support it. So we internalized some of those costs. And then instead of building a lot of things, we just tried to integrate it. So the Regional Council of Mayors was having a meeting. We went to the meeting. So we didn't pay for that meeting, we didn't pay for that convening, we showed up, we got integrated in their agenda because there was mission alignment, we got the feedback, we did that with boards of chambers, and we did it with like 10 or 20 other groups. And so every place we could, we just tried to be more efficient and reduce the cost of the project, which actually made it go a lot faster as well. We keep the hard costs of that work really low, and so we do all of that for about $25,000 a year, and a lot of that work is data. That's starting to really expand now because as we get to action, we're doing a workshop event this summer for the dashboard. So we are going to build something customized, but we're doing that now because we know the kind of conversation that we need that's not happening. Make It MSP is funded. We created kind of a capital stack for those real estate people in the room for Make It MSP. So Greater MSP budget has a certain contribution, and then the enterprise team companies all contribute something which is then pooled for another layer in the capital stack. And then philanthropies have started to come in more recently. We have found that it's a good idea not to have foundations as the base of that, because foundations tend to say, we'll start this, and then you have to figure out how to keep it going. So he said, well, let's not put them at the bottom of the stack. And so there are specific initiatives around the arts, around professional color retention, around startups that the philanthropic community is very interested in. And so that tends to be a top layer of the stack.
How are you working with education partners on this project, but specifically have you done to integrate them, and what's their role?
Make it MSP, for instance. So initially, I think the education community didn't see a lot of connectivity to it, that this was about mobile professionals and it's not what they do. But as the work, because of the way we've done the work and the issues that we're tackling in the work, I think that we've had an interest, and now that's being reflected, especially in higher ed. And so they are working to attract faculty, grad students, undergraduates. We've interestingly found that the business model of a higher ed institution is not to retain people. The business model is to place people, right? So, and that's true of every university everywhere, because that is the reality of how higher ed works these days. And in some cases, there's a counter incentive for higher ed institutions to keep people locally, because they like to be able to say oftentimes that their graduates go to X number of states or X number of companies or countries. And so if that's true, then we have as much opportunity with universities here as we with universities across the country. So we're starting to play with that and say, Carnegie Mellon, most of your graduates are going to go or stay in Pittsburgh or the surrounding area, but we want to be your second choice. If we can be the second choice of 100 universities across the country, we could kind of solve that problem fairly quickly. So that's another strategy that we're looking at.
You've mentioned some events and some things online to help newcomers and young professionals break into the community. Are there other things you can talk about, particularly maybe in just kind of integrating them into boards, or how are you kind of more than just the one-off things that you're doing? How are you really helping them?
So we've learned a couple lessons for all these communities, whether it's tech or newcomers or professionals of color, that you need in person and you need digital. Digital gives you scale, and it creates a portal for people to get in and navigate out once they're connected. But if you don't have the in-person connectivity, people don't know what it is, they don't believe it if it's right for them. You have to have that personal element. So we have, on makeitmsp.org, we keep building these community pages. So we built a community page for newcomers after we understood after talking to those 800 newcomers last year and what they were looking for. We didn't want to just put a bunch of stuff up there. Something else we've learned is people have pretty high expectations when they have digital interactions. And so if they go someplace and it doesn't have what they want, or just the tone is off, or the language is off, or it sends them to something that doesn't work, they're not coming back. And so we waited to build a lot of the digital stuff until we had the data, so that when we go out, we're having more positive kind of contacts up front, which supports the scale. On the newcomer work, it's a portfolio within a portfolio. And so the newcomer guide, we're making contacts to media, we're working with real estate. Where are the natural markets and touch points for people who are trying to who touch newcomers, and who are trying to find newcomers, and give them some tools as well.
You talked a little bit about that intern event that you had at US Bank. Are those folks that you are hoping will join the community, or do they have jobs waiting for them, or what is the goal of reaching out to those interns?
So the intern population is kind of the lowest hanging fruit. So these people are here, they are working here, they are likely to receive an offer to be here. So and we can aggregate that audience, and we can learn from them. So this is like the natural starting point. We wanted to do that last year, and this was something we learned about working with the companies. We just started having the conversation too late because we didn't understand their timelines. So this year we had to start talking in January about the June event, so it was integrated into their systems. The event is in a couple weeks, and we'll see how it goes. I think it'll probably be pretty big.
Looks like all of the task forces that you have include some sort of philanthropic organization or foundation. Why is that? Can you talk about the importance of having them on board?
All of this work is inherently cross-sector. It leans private sector in the sense that it's measurable and really sharp, and we ask a lot of hard questions up front, and things that don't work get shut down. And so we try to bring that kind of discipline to solving large-scale community problems. But by community problems, I mean they're everybody's problems to some degree. Philanthropy is there because they've seen the value of it, and they see alignment. Every philanthropy isn't in everything. I mean, based on what it is, I mean, the Bush Foundation is excited and jumped into the startup work, and the McKnight Foundation is huge in the arts. So they backed some work we did at Northern Spark. But we were creating these kind of portals that are helping philanthropy connect with things in the community that they don't see. And that's part of what Make It MSP is doing. It's kind of reaching down to some of the most exciting, authentic, innovative stuff and raising it up and saying, this is the thing. It's the thing that doesn't always get the media attention, that people don't know to write about. And that's where some of the most exciting things are.
You mentioned that the region does a great job of inclusion for women and immigrants, but not necessarily minorities, other people of color. Have you learned yet what those lessons might be and how you can apply the inclusion that you've been successful with women and immigrants into that minority segment of the population?
Well, some early theories based on the data we see are that there are some different forces. But the work that we're doing now and the data we got back from the survey of professionals of color last year show that it's about connectivity. A huge part of it's about connectivity and being able to find your people. I lived in Baltimore before moving here. It's just a much more diverse city, and so it's easier to find. You're seeing people in more diverse communities, and so part of it's about representation. So we got a lot of clear ideas and themes out of that survey, which they're clear to the folks who filled out the survey, but might not be clear to everybody else. And so we're going through a process of translation. Like a big issue that came out was cultural competence. We need to increase the cultural competence of the region. Well, what does that mean, right? And so now we're talking about what does that mean, and what does it mean for different groups of people, and how do you measure that, and what can you do? How can you scale cultural competence, right? So this is a really messy, hard space, and people are looking for really clean answers. And I think that's why the data is so important in this conversation and every other conversation, because I can't tell you what 4 steps out looks like. But the data is giving you pretty clear indication what the next step is. So if we've got the trust and you believe that this could work and you care about this issue, let's take that next step. And that's going to show us the step after that. And I mean, that's kind of where we're at in that work.
How many entities are involved in the data collection, and how often do you update that data for the dashboard?
So we've played around with different ways of doing it. This year we centralized a little bit more in the GREATER MSP research team and Minnesota Compass. I don't know if you've heard about Minnesota Compass, but it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan research arm, staffed with really credible PhDs. That's not part of the state or local government. We're accessing that resource now and kind of connecting the work that Minnesota Compass is doing to that project. And it was kind of interesting in the beginning. Compass was saying, in a kind of a Minnesota way, like, this kind of sounds like Minnesota Compass. You're kind of competing with us. I mean, so it's our understanding that you're not trying to actually drive change. You're just trying to put good information out there. Is that right? And they said, yeah, that's totally right. We're not trying to do too much beyond getting the data out there. We said, great. We're all about drive and change. And so there's an intersection and a mission alignment that we've achieved by working together over a couple of years that overcame some initial concern about duplication or competition.
Have you worked across county lines to attract and retain talent, and then is there a role that state government has had?
So the Economic Development Partnership is a 16-county MSA, so all of this is inherently across county boundaries. I spend a lot of time talking in front of county boards about various things, and the fundamental issue there is the economy is regional. That's how the economy actually functions, but we're organized in sub-geographies, and so our identities are different, our accountabilities are different, and that is just an inherent tension that we're always trying to manage. But it's pretty clear with the data we have about the workforce. I mean, whether you're in Hennepin County or Ramsey County or Dakota County or all the other counties you've never heard of, workforce just flows all across this region. And so a job, over here is being filled by someone over here who's paying property taxes. So it's just one flow. And part of what this project has helped us do is to tell that story about how the economy works. And now that workforce is such a focus, like, here's how the workforce actually works. It doesn't change some of those underlying issues of county commissioners and mayors need to represent and do work on behalf of the locality, but it does change the way they think about solutions.
You mentioned.
There was a question over here, too.
Can I do the old-fashioned way? I can't make the board. I'm on there, but I haven't made it yet.
I'll allow it this one time.
Peter, I'm Lyle, and there are a lot of people in this room that are working on workforce-related things. And if we could have a meeting with you or one of your team members between 1:30 and 3:30, we'd really appreciate it to work something like that out.
Unfortunately, not today. But I'd be happy to talk afterwards, you know, to get a call or something like that. There's a lot that I'm not talking about today, and something we're getting we're involved in pretty deeply is the modernization of our public workforce system. And in this metro, we have 6 different workforce investment boards. So the whole idea I was just mentioning about cross county and how the region actually works and how the economy actually works, you know, it's pretty hard to solve a workforce issue in one of those silos. And so WIOA has been a push, and we're using some of those, that mandate that's coming down has really been helpful, actually, and we're going to be doing some new and interesting stuff there.
We have time for one last question. We've talked a lot here this week about Fortune 500 companies, but how are some of the smaller companies embracing what you're doing, and what's their role been?
Great question. And that's, you know, you're successful when people start attacking you on different issues. And so, you know, the first thing was, this is the wrong thing, and then it's like, well, this isn't going to work, and then it's like, well, I'm not involved. And that's what I've been hearing more recently. And what we're saying is, okay, we're now adapting tactics to touch more small, medium-sized business. But what we've learned in this work is it's in this community, what we can do is we build with the big to provide for everybody, right? Because if you are a small-sized business or even a medium-sized business, which is a pretty big definition, you know, you don't have a talent team where you can take somebody often and say, you're going to work on this for 14 months. You're going to go to this. We can't exactly tell you what the result's going to be, what the value proposition is going to be, but, you know, this is the right thing, and it's really a smart way to do it. That just doesn't cut it. And so what we do by getting the really large companies together who have that capacity is in the building phase we create, and now that we have these toolkits and we have neighborhood guides and we have events to offer people, now it's about getting that out. And it's not sales per se, because we're not selling it, we're just giving it away. But it is translation to say, this is for you, this is how to use it effectively. So something we're doing in next month in July is we have an event with the Minneapolis-Saint Paul Business Journal, which is going to be a little bit more focused on small, medium-sized business to talk about the professional of color work. So here's what you should all know, we'll say, about diversity and inclusion to small, medium-sized business leaders. And here is a conversation in a box that we are building that takes this data and is going to help every business leader start an informed conversation about improving inclusion within their company.
Peter, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.